Hello and welcome to the Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton. And I'm joined here by Jeremy Smith. How are you doing, Jeremy?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. And of course, we're here to talk about Amadou Onana, who Everton have been linked with kind of on and off all through the summer, but the rumours have really started to ramp up in the last 24 hours. I know Fabrizio Romano has reported that apparently the player wants Everton over West Ham, which baffles Everton supporters as much as it baffles anyone else. So, but
I'm smiling because I'm a Brighton fan, and Fabrizio Romano is not a popular man amongst Brighton fans at the moment.
Yeah, he's definitely been making a lot of headlines recently. But in terms of Onana, I have to admit I don't know much about the player, and for Everton supporters in a similar boat to me, that's why you're here to tell us just a bit about him, really. So I think the main thing from what I think the basics we've all gleaned is defensive midfielder. Would you say he's more of a holding sort of midfielder, defensive minded, or is he a bit more of a roaming type player, I guess? What would you say?
Yeah, I think so far definitely defensive, sort of sit in front of them, in front of the defense, and provide that kind of shield. Tall, physical, really good tackler. He seems to have a bit of a range of passing on him, so I think there's definitely potential there to sort of push forward, be a little bit more box to box. But from what we've seen so far, definitely just a sitter. But I'm saying what we've seen so far, that's kind of not the problem. There's no doubt that he's shown a lot of potential so far, but he's only got sort of a dozen top flight starts to his name so far. So while everyone has seen the potential, and he did play over 30 games last year for Lille, a lot of them were as sub, and it's sort of a little bit of a head scratcher that he's already kind of commanding such a big fee.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, obviously at 20 years old, there's obviously going to be elements of his game that aren't quite polished yet. So like you said, what sort of things do you think he could maybe improve upon for his, for the position you say, defensive midfielder, or moving as a bit more of a progressive midfielder?
That's the thing. It's hard to say, because I guess when he's mostly sort of playing bit part roles, coming on as sub, it's hard to kind of really pinpoint yet what the big issues there are. I mean, for me, one of the big sort of unknowns when midfielders go from France to England is, I think, particularly for a midfield position, it's about sort of stamina, and in the Premier League, you don't get a break. You might get a little bit. Ligue 1 is sort of just as physical, but it's a little bit more stop-start. It's not quite as frenetic. And I think some midfielders sort of have issues adapting to that aspect of the game. So that's something that we need to see a little bit more of from him, whether he can really do sort of 90 minutes week in, week out. I guess, arguably, if he's sitting and he's got a good reading of the game, and that's only going to improve with experience, then, hopefully he doesn't need to move quite as much as a box to box, if you know what I mean. But yeah, that's an area where I'm not saying there's room for improvement there, but there's room to kind of see what he's all about. And then, yeah, as I said, the passing, I think, is very good, but that was not his role at Lille. By the way, it was a bit of a struggle for Lille generally last season in their title defence. Obviously, a very different team, a different coach, and they struggled a little bit. So in those circumstances, it's difficult to expect a 20-year-old to come in and sort of, begin to control things. But so everything we've seen from him so far is positive, and there's clearly potential there. It's just too early to say just how far he can go, I guess.
Yeah, and like you say, a very defensive-minded player, and so I doubt there's been many elements of him that shows he's much of a threat going forward. Obviously, Everton is someone who we don't have a lot of goals in the team at the moment, and obviously, I think a lot of fans are worrying where these goals are going to come from. I imagine this sort of signing is not exactly looking to address that. Would you say?
I'd say definitely not, in terms of sort of from what we've seen so far. He doesn't particularly have like an inclination to, hit sort of 30-yarders into the top corner or anything like that. But, with his height, you'd hope that's something that coaches would like to work on, because there's definitely no reason why he shouldn't kind of develop into a good aerial threat at free kicks. But yeah, so far from what we've seen, you know, I think he scored one league goal. He's got a couple of in cups, but that's not something that I yet. But as that sitter, obviously, he's not going to be doing too much in terms of open play on that side.
Of course, you've already touched on this a little bit before, but the fee, of course, is suggested to be around 30 million with bonuses not included. And obviously, you kind of touched upon it's a bit unclear why perhaps that such a big fee is being suggested so early on in his career after he's not had that many starts. So yeah, just I kind of break that down with, I guess, what sort of deal could Everton be getting if it does actually go through?
I mean, the thing is, Lille have proved the last few years, even though they've had a change of management. I don't mean coach. I mean, like, you know, people running the club. They do sort of, you know, put a hard bargain, and their model the last few years has been sort of bringing these sort of unpolished players very cheap, develop them a little bit, and then sell them for a lot of money. And, you know, Arsenal with their 80 million for Pepe, for example, can kind of testify to that. So this sort of carries on in that line of thinking, and they're probably rubbing their hands. I mean, they could certainly do with the money as a club. So I don't think they were necessarily thinking in terms of selling him. He's, as we said, 20-year-old, just broke through this season with a lot of potential. But, you know, everyone has their price, and I think this would certainly be more than Lille were expecting. But yeah, French clubs like their sort of bonuses. So I'm not surprised there's sort of add-ons, which presumably would be, you know, if he then moves on to an even bigger club, or, you know, depending on how much international recognition he gets with Belgium, that kind of thing. But even as a base fee, whatever it is, 35 million euros seems, I think, a relatively big gamble. I think, you know, you look at players like Tchouaméni, who's obviously gone to Real Madrid, and you sort of think, you know, France is a good breeding ground for these sort of defensive or box-to-box midfielders. But that doesn't mean that every single one of them is going to be a resounding success. So, you know, in 2-3 years, we could look back on it and say it's a bargain, or we could, you know, I'm old enough to remember Alex Nyarko at Everton, which didn't go down so well, for example. Spurs have had a few midfielders, you know, Capu, Stambouli and Ndombele, not all exactly the same kind of player, but midfielders that have sort of really struggled to make that transition from France to England. So there is a bit of a risk there. And, you know, Boubacar Kamara going from Marseille to Villa for a free transfer. I'm not saying that he would necessarily have gone to Everton, but, you know, there's no doubt of the two deals which looks much better at this stage anyway.
And of course, sticking with defensive midfielders who have made it big in France and indeed at Lille, Idrissa Gueye is someone else who Everton look to be close to signing. And of course, you know, with the likes of Abdoulaye Doucouré and Allen, who are already at the club, how do you think Onana could possibly gel with those type of players? What sort of midfielders is he currently playing with at Lille, and like, are there any similarities there? What sort of system in midfield do you reckon Lampard might employ with the midfielders he might have at his disposal?
I think, I mean, whether you're playing sort of a 2 or a 3 in midfield, I just think that there hasn't been a successful club in history that didn't have an extremely talented and probably underrated defensive midfielder. So I think the position that Onana plays, whether, yeah, as I said, whether he's playing in a 2 or you know, the base of a diamond, he's going to be that kind of player is needed. And obviously then it gives other players the freedom to push forward a little bit. I think one of Gueye's problems at PSG, and frankly the problem with a lot of PSG's midfield, is that no one was entirely sure what their best position was. They were all sort of, a lot of their midfielders are kind of instinctively holders who can push forward a little bit, but you wouldn't say a proper box-to-box or proper attacking minded midfielders. And so there was a real gap between midfield and attack for PSG. And I think Gueye has kind of made one of the scapegoats for that. But if he went back to Everton, I think that's the thing. For me, he is a little bit more than, similar to Conte probably. He's probably a better kind of transitional player than we gave him credit for a lot of the time, and he's not simply a holding midfielder. And when he was given a little bit of freedom at PSG, even came up with he had a sort of short purple patch of decent goal scoring, that kind of thing. So I think he could sort of tie in well with Onana in terms of sort of having a little bit more freedom to push forward. I guess Alan is more, from what I've seen of him, more that kind of quarterback role where he sits, but he's more about the passing and keeping everything moving rather than the purely defensive role. And then Doucouré for me is just your archetypal box to box, great engine, and can add something to sort of attacking moves as well. So obviously I don't think there's room for all four of them at once, but I think Onana could work with all of them, because I think as long as he's happy to do that sitting role, then he gives all of the others a little bit more freedom to do what they do best.
Yeah, that's definitely encouraging news, and I think that might tie into just how big a transfer fee he's commanding, because it's quite a difficult role to get. I know Everton we've needed one for years, that type of holding midfielder to just sit in front of the defence and break up play. So I guess that possibly contributes to just how much
since Peter Reid.
Yeah, I guess you could go all the way back to that if you really wanted to. And of course, obviously the main headline that's broken out is, of course, it looked like he was going to be going to West Ham United. And of course, now the speculation seems to be that he prefers a move to Everton. Whether or not we've got the money to complete the deal or not is a different matter. But what would you? I don't know. Could you suggest a reason why he would be drawn to Everton over West Ham? We're all scratching our heads. So, could you shed any more light on the situation?
Honestly, not really. I mean, I think Everton have had we were talking about French players before. Everton have had a decent record with Belgian players in recent years, the likes of Fellaini and Mirallas, I guess. So, it might be that. Maybe he's getting good advice, maybe from Martinez as well. Obviously, it didn't end well with Everton, but I'm sure Martinez must have fond memories of his time on the bench. So it could be a little bit of that. I guess for a young midfielder, even though they're very different kinds of players, maybe the draw of playing under a Lampard, obviously sort of on the kind of international stage, Lampard's a better known name than Moyes. But apart from that, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure either. Maybe he feels like, that's a better place to sort of get straight into the first team and get more experience, whereas at West Ham, he'd be playing understudy to the likes of Declan Rice, and maybe he's looking to get more game time than he got last year. But there's no obvious answers there.
Okay, well, to round it all off, I'm gonna have to ask you for a judgment. So if the deal goes through, 30 million, the fee being suggested, 30 million plus add-ons, deal goes through, and Onana signs for Everton, do you think it'll be a good deal?
I feel like it'd be a cop-out to say I genuinely don't know. I think he'll be a good player. I think he'll succeed at Everton. It still feels like a lot of money, but the way transfer prices are at the moment anyway, it could be that even if you sort of break even on him in a couple of years' time, and having had a good couple of seasons out of him, then that's not such a bad thing. But I think there's great potential for the player, and for Everton, obviously, to bring in a player like that. If they can work on him and get all the best out of him, then it should be win-win.
Okay, well, fair enough. Let's fingers crossed if it does go through. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for talking to us, Jeremy.
No problem.
That's we'll see what happens if the Onana deal goes through. So that has been that. Please leave a like if you enjoyed. Comment leaving your thoughts about the Onana deal. Hopefully now if you know a bit more about him. And we will see you in the next video. Cheers.